Okay, and we are going to finish off with the Taiwanese. There's actually the Tibetans after this, but the Tibetans have similar clothing to Southeast Asians. So we're going to do that for next time. But we'll do the Taiwanese. So when we think of Taiwanese people, right, we think of Chinese people, but the Taiwanese or the Chinese only started settling in China in the 1600s. And so because this is sort of traditional and native clothing, we're not showing the clothing of the Chinese people, but the original Taiwanese people. So Taiwanese clothing was very varied and unique, and both genders would wear trousers and skirts, which was quite rare in the world. Women would wear a lot of jewelry, especially in the form of necklaces and decorations, on their very wide-brimmed round hats. And also, because the island's climate, they wouldn't wear any shoes. All right, so first example, the Atayal people. So again, right, clearly not very Chinese-looking clothes. In fact, it says here, manners of the savages in Formosa. So we can see what the people thought of, the photographer at least thought of these people. But yeah, these are the native people of Taiwan. Another example, this does look a little more Chinese. It says Aborigines woman in Formosa. In other words, the Formosa was the old name for Taiwan. We get the Paiwan people in Taiwan. Yeah, I have to say this guy looks a little goofy, in my opinion at least. A very interesting hat though he has here, and very tight pants. So I don't know, maybe he was gay, maybe. Yeah, and I think I'll end it here. But yeah, guys, write your final thoughts on in the chat. We're gonna do Southeast Asia next time. And also tell me what you thought of the presentation. Did you like it? Do you want to see a change in how I present it? Let me know. All right, so Filipino clothing obviously is very similar to other Southeast Asian clothing, with the sarong being worn, although it could vary in length from either knee length to nearly floor length. And it was pretty much always red, so again, a lot of similarities to Northeast Indian clothing, and was striped with black and white stripes being the most common. Shirts would be quite decorated, but tended to be more simple. Men would have either worn a bahag, or a type of loincloth or trousers, which were influenced by both local and Spanish culture. Now, shoes would not have been worn, and hats sometimes would be worn, with an example being the salakot, or a traditional headgear that is cone-shaped with tassels, beads, and feathers, sometimes used on the rim. And this, in fact, inspired the British pith helmet. And I'm not sure exactly how the British came into contact with this. They did occupy the Philippines for like a couple of years, but yeah, maybe that was when it happened in the Seven Years' War. But I should mention that Filipino clothing was not universally worn across the Philippines, but instead, this is what was most commonly worn at the very north and very south of the archipelago. All right, so the Igorot, for example, they live in the very north of the country. And again, this is sort of what I was talking about, right? The sort of shorter sarong being worn here. And again, we see the same thing, red with a lot of stripes. The Ibaloi also live in the north on the island of Luzon. And we can see here that the man is also wearing a loincloth. So these are actually two separate cloths. This isn't a shirt of any kind. Cebuano, so they live on the island of Cebu. And we can see that the man here is wearing trousers. So trousers were sometimes worn, whereas the woman is wearing a skirt. But we can see neither of them are wearing shoes. Then the Iranun, and I always thought this picture was quite cool, especially with the very long and unique nails here made out of gold, the very cool headdress, and then the extremely long skirt that went all the way down to the floor. And even the belt actually is quite cool. The Bland, so they have, again, ankle length skirt here, very cool shirt, a lot of embroidery and decorations. Tedurai, so again, we see the man here is wearing trousers. Also, we see the men have a variety, or both have a variety of headgear. So we see this, for example, this, this. It's quite a lot of variation there. I always thought this picture was cool, the yakan. It almost looks like it's like the backdrop of the pyramids in Egypt or somewhere, but or not, the pyramids, but inside. But yeah, very cool face paint. And I'm not sure if this is meant to hold a knife. It could be. But yeah, she sort of has the skirt here and then underneath the trousers. And again, we see no shoes over here. And so yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, and so that's it for the Philippines. Okay, now the Iban people. The Iban people were very known for having this extremely decorated kind of hairstyle, mainly made out of, I think, silver or some other kind of metal. And so, yeah, we can see it right here. Very elaborate headdress, along with a lot of bracelets all around here. And then even a bunch of, yeah, metal things worn around the waist and underneath the waist with all these little gold metal plates. So yeah, we see that here. She has even more of them. Yeah, same thing there, the bracelets, and then the headgear. So it's pretty cool. And then they also have this cool thing. I'm not sure exactly what this is called, but it essentially covers the shoulders. And we see sort of like mid calf length skirts and then the anklets, at least for these two women. And then same thing with the Iban. In fact, this one is even more obvious. We can see she's literally just wearing a bunch of rings to cover her body all the way from her armpits down to a little bit beneath her butt. Just a whole series of rings, and then a crazy amount of bracelets too that cover her entire front arm. And even though it's hard to see, she's essentially wearing the same thing here as these people are. Then the man wears less, but he still has the loincloth, the feathers, and a couple of, necklaces and bracelets as well. All right, so that's it. Now we're going to go to Indonesian. So let's talk a little bit about Indonesian. So Indonesian clothing, keep in mind this is not the clothing that was worn across most of Indonesia, but is actually mainly concentrated in Western Sumatra and some parts of Borneo and Java. And keep in mind, this is going to be the most elaborate clothing of any area in the world, with the amount of gold decoration being insane. Indonesian clothing was actually one of the few types in Asia where men only wore trousers, although it was worn with a thigh-length skirt worn over it. Additionally, men nearly always wore coats or vests over their shirts, and these were often extremely embroidered and had bright dynamic colors. They would wear very decorated hats, either in the form of a mitre, or a hat that is round at the bottom and triangular at the top, or even a flat cap that is semi-round. Also, for footwear, they would wear these very unique pointed shoes that would be open at the top until halfway down the foot. So let's look at some examples. First of all, right, we start off with this thing, which is crazy. Her entire body here is decorated with jewelry, and that's like probably the most insane hat we've seen so far in this presentation. Um, so yeah, I can't even really begin to describe what this is, but you can see for yourself. She's wearing these very long, I don't know, almost nail claw looking things. And then yeah, her whole body is just decorated with all these jewels, front and back, right and left, everywhere. And then we have the Banjar people. And so here we see what I was talking about with the men. So this kind of hat known as a bishop's hat is called a mitre officially. You can see the man is wearing trousers. They're both wearing very cool looking shoes. And his is a lot simpler but still has embroidery, whereas she has the very elaborate hair style, very tight sarong, and then a lot of jewelry all over her body. The Kerinki, I think they're on Borneo, but I could be mistaken. But they have, again, a lot of gold that they're wearing on their head. Now, this one is probably the craziest, the Minangkabau. I'm trying to remember what island they're from. But yeah, this, I mean, I guess it must not be too heavy, but the amount of jewelry is just insane on this, little headgear thing that they're wearing. And then, of course, a lot of jewelry all over their body too. So yeah, just imagine walking to a room full of people dressed like this. It would be hard to beat them. In fact, I don't think it would be possible to beat them in terms of the amount of decoration they have here. And this one I think is so much just like over the top. Like, I mean, of course, I would argue this is also over the top, but this is crazy. Like both the man and the woman, which is pretty rare. They're both wearing this crazy crown looking thing, all this stuff over their ears, so much jewelry all over their body. You know, the amount of decoration like among Indonesian clothing is just unparalleled in the entire world. Then we get Betawi. Now this is looks a lot better. This is in Western Java, by the way, and I think this is like, pretty nice, but not as extreme. So this is another example. Again, we can kind of see from the name what island this is. And the Sasak people live on an island right next to Bali. So again, this is much more toned down, but you still see some of the same features. Assamese. So Aceh is the northwestern part of Indonesia and also like the most western part of the entire country. And we can see again the men wearing the trousers, a lot of decoration, the mitre hat, and women, again, crazy headgear, so much decoration. But it is more toned down, especially compared to like the Palembang people, for example. Sundanese, they're also in Western Java as well. Again, this seems like much more moderate. Same with the Bantonese, also same area, and you can kind of tell they're Muslims, right, by the kind of fez that they're wearing. So he's wearing a fez. This guy's also wearing a fez. She's actually wearing a hijab here. The Gayo people, which is kind of funny to say, but yeah, they also live in Sumatra. And again, we see the man once again wearing the mitre hat, the woman wearing something else. The Kluet, same kind of mitre hat that this man's wearing. A lot of decoration and embroidery, but a little less than the woman who, has all this. The Angkola, which is kind of funny, just reminds me of Angola. This actually I quite like. She has a very elaborate headdress here, but he has a cool hat. Very nice buy that he's wearing. I think this hosts some kind of knife. And yeah, very cool decoration. We have a lot of examples here just because of how elaborate this is. Mandailing, very similar. In fact, you can see the same kind of hat is worn by the man and by the woman. It's just that this is much more elaborate, all red, and even the hands are red, as well as the shoes, the trousers, the skirt, the shirt, everything. Nias people live on an island right off the western coast of Sumatra, and it is more toned down here, but still, we see the elaborate hairstyle. Then we have the Coma ring, and this is one of my favorite pictures for sure. I very much like the man's clothing, the trousers, the insane decoration and embroidery, as well as the hat. Of course, the background's nice suit too. And yeah, and then the woman has crazy amounts of jewelry here, and of course, especially on her head. That headdress is like over a foot tall and a foot wide. So that's quite cool. And so basically, in contrast to the extravagance of the Indonesian clothing style, the Javanese style was much humbler, and it basically consisted of a dress and upper garment, although the dress was unique because of the slit on the side that would allow for more movement. And this meant that undergarments, which were usually shorts, were worn just underneath the dress. Now, just like the Kadai women, the Javanese woman would not or would wear their hair tied up, usually in a bun, while the men would generally wear trousers or a sarong, a shirt, and a jacket over it. And basically, just like the Malays, the Javanese would wear the sarong and the songkok for men, and then the turong for women. All right, so we'll see an example of this. So here's an example. We have the man on the left, woman on the right, and we can see in contrast to the craziness of what was going on right before, this is much simpler. Here are the Banyuma-san performing the dance. Again, much more simple clothing. Siribonese, they're very famous for their mask dance, so that's why she's wearing a mask. And we can see, yeah, this is depicting a lot of outdoor wildlife scenery and very long decorations coming from the side of the head all the way down to the knees. All right, and so then that's it for that. We'll move on now to mountainous Southeast Asian clothing. And I only gave it that name because I couldn't really find a better name. But it basically was very much different from the rest of Southeast Asia and was characterized by the wearing of a full-length black dress with some embroidery down the middle. And only the hands, feet, and head would be left uncovered. So here's some examples. The Dusun people, again, as we can see, black down the middle. Murut, same thing, black down the middle. And yes, and so that's it. And so that's basically the end for Southeast Asia. And so now we're going to move to Oceania. And so we're going to start off with West Papuan. So the West Papuan, I'm telling you guys, pay attention to this one because it's actually pretty funny. So the West Papuans are most known for just wearing the koteka also known as a penis gourd. Also, yes, warning, this is where the nudity is going to start coming out. So it's made out of a dried out gourd, which is a plant, and it was held in place by a string that was wrapped around your testicles or hips. You can also often tell the ethnicity of the user by how they wear it, and so depending on how the gourd was worn, if it was straight up, straight out, or at an angle, all of these things would indicate your ethnicity. The shape would also indicate your status, and if it leans left, you're a general, while if it leans right, you're an aristocrat. And then if it's straight, that meant you were a virgin. Also, a stone weight was placed inside to allow the gourd to expand as something else inside there also expands. But you can use your imagination to figure that out. So actually, in 1971, Indonesia tried to introduce shorts, and dresses to these people, but instead they used the shorts as hats, and the dresses were used by the women as bags. So they didn't really get the memo. So first we have the Dani, and of course the most recognizable thing we can immediately see is the nose kind of wearing thing. Um, I don't even know what this is called, but yeah, whatever this is, the me. Um, Again, quite obvious. In fact, we can see the rock on the end of the Koteka right here. And yeah, it looks quite ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, like I had a hard time trying not to laugh when I first found these pictures. But yeah, this goes pretty far up and it is held by this little string over here. Oh, look at this. This is probably the most stupid type of clothing I've ever seen in my entire life. The Marind people. There's nothing I can even really say to describe this. You like between the nose, this, well, it's Papua, but Indonesian side. And yeah, I don't know if you saw them. The Indonesian government actually started like distributing normal clothes to these people, like trousers and skirts and whatever, and they literally wore them as like bags and hats. Like the men started wearing the trousers as hats. Yeah, so Marinda people look probably the most clown-looking people I've ever seen. Okay, and then we move on to Australian. And Australian clothing is most notable for the use of white body paint, and usually the only kind of clothing that was worn was a loincloth for men and women. So yeah, we start off with the Laurakia people, and yeah, they aren't wearing anything, just have a lot of ugly scars on their body. The Wakaya people, this guy is actually the wizard or great medicine man of the Wakaya who live in central Australia. The Kuku Yulanji, very funny name, but yeah, we can see right the white body paint and then the hands there. The Torres Strait Islanders, so they're wearing this now. I assume at the time they wouldn't have worn anything except the actual grass skirt, but yeah, the Torres Strait Islanders wore the Darkin Jung. I actually think this picture looks pretty cool. It looked kind of epic. Here we have the Gandangara. And again, very dramatic pose. So that's why I kept this one here. The Karna. So this was an old warrior. And this is almost like a boomerang. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it was, but we can see he's just wearing this kind of animal hide over his lower body, and that's it. And so, yeah, this is the easiest part of the presentation because there's not much to describe. The Kaitetie, again, we can see the ritual scarring that's going on here. Okay, and now we're going to move on to Oceanian clothing. Okay, so Oceanian clothing was most recognizable for the use of grass skirts, which were worn by both genders all across the continent's many islands. And they were usually the only thing worn by both men and women, meaning that they would go topless. Now, keep in mind when I say Oceania, I basically just mean all the countries except Australia, because we already had our separate category for Australia. You start off with a Huli, and this is one of the coolest looking guys I've ever seen, just because he's, both cool and intimidating. He definitely has something going through his nose. I can't really tell what that is. He has the face painting, the body painting, the epic beard, and the cool hat. So this is just one of the coolest and most striking pictures I've ever seen. You got the Yatmul, and they have a crazy kind of mask that they wear, this whole, round thing all around their head. And again, this is what we're talking about, the grass skirt. We see the grass skirt being worn here. And the Tahitian people who live on the island of Tahiti, which is part of France now. And yeah, we can see very obviously the grass skirts, the interesting headgear, and then for more normal occasions, the men are just wearing short loincloths, the women are wearing, dresses that go basically up to the knee. All right, and then that's it. And now we're going to move to North America. So